These are the questions, right? Somebody there? The importance of nothing, identity applied linguistics. What is this? No, what is this? Oh, no, not this. Oh, we are online, right?
Yes.
Okay. Welcome to the live session for Applied Linguistics course. We would like to take your questions, as many as possible, for this session. We have some 11, 12 names here. We have some of the questions where we don't know how many people are there online. Who are there? Can we see people? No. Oh, these are the people. This is Hemant Kumar Mishra. When is it going to start? The time was 4 p.m. Sorry, Hemant, we were a couple of minutes delayed because of some technical issues. So please start your questions. We will be happy to answer your questions right away. I see there are some questions here that we have already printed. Can you name a resource book that is reliable for linguistics? So I think you are looking for a resource book that is reliable for linguistics in general, not just for applied linguistics. Good afternoon, everybody. So resource, there are a lot of books as materials available uh, uh, online, offline. So you don't have to worry about that. But to begin with, um, we have several books listed online in our course. So you can take a look at the list and the materials that we have put online. They will be very helpful to you. Vijay Amle, we have this subject in our MA English. It's a new subject. Okay, fine. So many myths about characteristics of a dialect and differences between language and dialect. Is there a dialect? If so, what is that? How do you define that? Okay, I'll come back to that, Hemant Kumar Mishra, in a minute. Let me look at some of the questions. So, Vijay Amle, you are talking about this subject is in your MA English. So just feel free to ask questions if you have. I am here and I'll be happy to answer your questions. Hemant, I start with your question as I see it online from you. It's about language and dialect. You see, uh, the shortest answer is there is no dialect. Dialect is a scope if one opts for applied linguistics after graduation. I'll come to Chandrima. I will come to your question also in a minute. But first of all, I wanted to explain this dialect and language story to you, Hemanta. Short answer is there is no dialect. Dialect is a derogatory term uh, when it is used for language. Every language that is spoken by people can be called language. Sometimes people use the term dialect in non-derogatory fashion as well, where people mean a variety of language or people mean uh, uh, language is spoken by a smaller number of people, intelligibility. So all these things are things that we say about dialect. But as you understand language from technical standpoint of acquisition, there is no dialect, everything is language. And that's how you have to define that all languages have independent status. No language is related to, no language is dependent on anything else. I hope, and this needs to be understood in the right context. You don't have to understand this out of context, otherwise there will be a problem. So let me know if this makes sense to you. If not, we come back to that again. We want to know history of this subject. Oh my God, that's a huge thing for me to tell you, the history of this subject. But before that, let me go back to Chandrima. Am I right? I think this is the name, Chandrima. You see, the scope of applied linguistics is huge. I don't know, something like continuum of knowledge of language. Please elaborate. I will elaborate that also, Priyanka. So, first of all, scope of this subject is such that we learn a lot about language and learn a lot about language in different use of language in different domains. Applied linguistics is about applying theoretical tools that we know about language studies, language analysis to solve real life problems. So any domain where you see a problem that has some roots in language, that's you have scope of applied linguistics there, from forensics to in sociology to understanding computer science to complex machine learning issues to medical issues like dementia and dyslexia and disabilities to printing. Anywhere you see application of language, use of language, the domain of applied linguistics is relevant in all of that. So that's about the domain of applied linguistics. I see Madhushri Mukherjee has a question about monolingualism and multilingualism. Again, this is related to language and dialect issue. You see, when we have the capacity to speak and understand languages of different groups and different people, we are talking about multilingualism. We are talking about multilingualism doesn't mean multiple languages. Multilingualism doesn't necessarily mean knowledge of multiple languages. You know, when we learn language and when we understand language, languages are not like n+1. Languages are on a continuum. You see, in the real society also, where language stops and a new one begins, there is no hard and fast line. Similarly, there is no hard and fast line in real world where one language stops and the other begins. So what we do, the way we understand, is as long as we have capacity and understanding to navigate and negotiate through different languages, that is called multilingualism. And in that context, you will see every individual has capacity to deal with, in some sense, other languages also. Therefore, we are all multilinguals. There are several varieties of the language that we speak. If we have capacity to understand all different varieties of our own language, that also makes us multilingual. So in that context, nobody is monolingual and everybody is multilingual. That's what I meant. And this is not related when we understand the notion of monolingualism only when we try to understand languages n+1 and with their names like Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, Kannada, Hindi, Odia, Bengali. Then we count whether we know one language or two languages. But it's hard to count languages. questions. And you need to sit down, relax, and reflect on these questions to understand these parts. I hope this is making sense to you. If there is any difficulty, please forward it to me. I'll be happy to talk about it further. Talked about something about continuum and knowledge of language. Priyanka, knowledge of language simply means our capacity that we build through a subconscious process. Language acquisition. Hold on. Good afternoon. Explain in brief how can applied linguistics course help me teach spoken English. Okay, I will come back to that. Aparna, I have another question from Somsa. Corpus linguistics, I'll come back to that. Language acquisition in children. So what will be the case of adults? I'll come back to that as well. So okay, so let me look at it one by one. Priyanka, your question is about knowledge of language. See, knowledge of language in simple sense is about our underlying capacity. Our capacity to speak, our capacity to compute sentences in our mind is related to knowledge of language. That's what we mean by knowledge of language. Manasi Upadhyay, we have a paper, we have a chapter on applied linguistics and linguistics applied that we have referred to. So please look at this. The distinction is very trivial, not really very critical for you to understand. Concept of language is also a myth. No, Madhushri, concept of languages is not a myth. Language is reality. What is mythical and what sounds like myth is when we want to see one language totally different from another. That is myth. No language is separate from one another. You can see languages share sounds with each other. Languages share a lot of things. Language is a cultural construct. We negotiate cultural aspects through language. So languages are not totally separate from one another. Rather, languages, if you want to see them separately and if you want to see them unrelated to one another, then it looks like a myth. Otherwise, it's not a myth. How does applied linguistics, Aparna, how does applied linguistics help you teach English language? And this is related to the question of applied linguistics and linguistics applied as well. You see, and another question which was about acquisition of children, Chandrima. I'll try to put all 3-4 questions together and give you an answer to that. You see, the way we understand language learning, when we are looking at learning of language by children, we are talking about first language. When we are talking about learning of language by grown-up people, then we are looking at second language. So it's very different in the sense that we have direct and total access to universal grammar until we have crossed the age of 13 or 14. After 14 years of our age, in the sense of language development, we lose our connection with universal grammar. It becomes weaker, and therefore it is difficult to learn a language the way we learn as a child. And we can see that any language that you learn at a later stage, we don't speak the same way as we speak the language that we learn as children. So the evidence is quite evident by itself, and you can see all that. There is no issue with that. Applied linguistics, understanding how language works, understanding how we acquire, understanding the differences between first language and second language acquisition, and different patterns of language will help you teach English language as well. You will need to know what we learn and what we learn from our first language and how that is applied in teaching. And thus, teaching of English can be fun. Teaching of spoken English can be fun. Teaching of different aspects of English is going to be relevant. So that is very much relevant, and that's how it is related to the difference between L1 and L2 acquisition can be very much helpful for that as well. Hope things are becoming clearer, or I am making sense to you. There is little bit of delay in time. I don't know if you are listening to me in real time or not, but feel free to ask your question. I'm going to stay here for as long as it takes. I wish we could have interacted live, where you had an option to ask several questions directly. But I promise you, I will not ignore any question, and I'll try to respond to each one of them to the best of my capacity. So please feel free to ask. I'm going to stay here. There is no rush. Vijay Amle, tell us about the interdisciplinary nature of applied linguistics. Yeah, there is applied linguistics is interdisciplinary. As you can see, applied linguistics is about application of language tools in solving real life issues. So if we are looking at issues related to computer science, issues related to computation and language, then quite good amount of knowledge about computer science is relevant. If we are looking at psychology and language, then understanding psychological preliminaries is going to be very relevant for people. So understanding other domains is always relevant for dealing with questions that are grounded in applied linguistics. Revati Gautam just mentioned processing of language. Could you please elaborate with reference to acquisition, acquiring a new language? I find that everything I learn in new language, every time I learn a new language, there is a different process happening. Think a little bit more about it. When you learn every time a new language, it's not n+1. Readjustment happens in us. We accommodate a new one within us. It's not really a new process. And what I meant by processing is computational processing, and that is underlying, that is subconscious processing. Meaning, when we use a transitive verb in a language, we don't quite consciously think that transitive verbs require an object. It's a subconscious process that transitive verb requires an object, and we talk about when we use a transitive verb in our sentences, we use an object as well. So this is what I meant by processing. Does critical period hypothesis hold good? Of course, critical period hypothesis hold good. It's not fair to dismiss it, because we do see that critical period is relevant in understanding the point from where access to universal grammar becomes weaker. Where it doesn't seem like holding, and some people sound dismissive about it, what they really mean is there is no fixed moment, fixed period. For some people, critical period may be any time between 9 years of age to 15 years of age, and people individuals fall within this long period. So there is no specific date or year after which our access to universal grammar stops. So critical period hypothesis means a lot. It is good to know about. It helps us understand universal grammar. So that will be good enough to understand. Priyanka Naik again asking, I want to request you to that the organizers be more indicative in the discussion forum, because very few questions are rarely answered. Thanks, Priyanka, for your comment. We will take it up, and I promise you, I do look at question forum time to time. Feel free to post. I promise you that you will be getting responses more frequently. Pratima Das, I'll discuss the differences between corpus linguistics and pragmatics. What type of lexical features could be analyzed in a corpus? Pratima, we need to discuss a lot to answer your question. This is not 1 or 2 minutes response. I mean, 1 or 2 minutes response will not be enough. But I do understand the question, and I can tell you, to great extent, things that we do in corpus linguistics and both pragmatics are relevant to applied linguistics. And if you try to make your question a little more specific, I can try to address that. Otherwise, it is too broad a question. Pragmatics is definitely relevant to applied linguistics. In fact, let me help you understand in the following way. Everything that comes under the umbrella of linguistics, applied linguistics is a larger umbrella of that. If this metaphor helps you understand, it will be easier to see that. Anagha Manoj, there was a statement in your lecture, knowledge of language contains the rules that are responsible for the infiniteness. How is this different from LAD, which contains the principles and parameters both? Oh, definitely. There is not much of a difference between the two. What the way you can put the two together is language acquisition device is responsible for building knowledge of language. True. They are very much connected with one another. And definitely language acquisition device contains both principles and parameters, which are both part of universal grammar, and they become responsible for developing knowledge of language among us. Linguist now Chomsky and the theory, and also why it is faced with a lot of widespread criticism. Chandrima, you are asking about Chomskyan linguistics and Chomskyan theory of language, and why does it face a lot of widespread criticism? This is again too broad a question, but I think what I think you mean is how does why do people criticize Chomskyan linguistics? I think that's what you meant by widespread criticism. It's fair to criticize any theoretical position. There is no issue with that. But the more relevant part of any criticism is to come up with an alternative explanation. I'm not aware of any other alternative explanation as close as Chomskyan paradigm of linguistic theory explains language. So many a times people criticize things without getting into much details of that. In fact, if you look at the development of Chomskyan paradigm beginning from 1957 until 1995, all the developments have been based on changes that Chomsky or people working in his school, that is in his school of thought, have proposed. So criticism is not unfair. Criticism is fair only then we are forced to make changes and develop further. However, criticism without understanding the point is pointless, and it is not really fair. criticism for the sake of criticism is not fair, and that doesn't require any attention. So don't worry about that. Chomskyan theory is definitely foundation, and it explains a lot of things. So hope you are again getting replies to your questions. Priyanka, you want to know what corpus linguistics is in the first place. You see, corpus linguistics, as in simple terms, I can tell you, stands for it's a broader term for data linguistics. Large data is relevant these days for multiple aspects, and also it has roots in historical linguistics. So corpus linguistics is also related to documentation. So several kinds of activities fall within the larger domain of corpus linguistics. Anything else? Any other questions? Chandrima, what is linguistics grammar exactly? What is universal grammar exactly? Why is acoustic linguistics important? I don't know what you mean by acoustic linguistics. I think you're talking about acoustic phonology. The acoustic phonology and articulatory phonology are two different parts. I'm sorry, acoustic phonetics and articulatory phonetics are two different parts of phonetics, where one is related to how we hear and the other is related to how we speak. So for example, articulatory phonetics is about different processes of sound production system. I think that's what you meant. I will come back to Chandrima. I will come back to the question of universal grammar in a minute. Let me take a couple of other questions. How to name different spoken forms of a language? Can you name them dialect or right? Because the language is spoken differently, I mean pronunciation. You see, we don't have to name a language. Names are given by the society and the speakers. We don't have to name a language. We don't have to invent a name for a language. It's the job of the society to do. Our job as linguists is to study language. Our job as linguists is to understand how language works within society and within human mind. So not really, we don't really need to name them. And anything that society feels is different from others' language is a language by itself. So we don't have to name them as a dialect or a variety. You see, language as a dialect doesn't exist. Language as a variety. It depends on the speakers of the language to understand. Can you scope the NLP and computational linguistics? I don't understand. How any language till the date has been, how many languages? Status of how many languages? Okay, you mean how many languages till the date has been given the status of a standard language. Again, the notion of a standard language is not something that is given by anybody. And there is no count as such available. For example, Yes, Chandrima, Knowledge of Language by Chomsky is a good piece of reading. Please read that. So, nobody gives the status of a standard language. As you know, one variety among many acquires the status of a standard language, and that is related to the power structure in the society. So, there is no agency that gives the status of a standard language, as I would put. I still remember somebody asked a question. I think Chandrima, you had asked the question about universal grammar. See, universal grammar is okay. So, what is universal grammar is basically things that are common across languages and things that is things related to language that are common across languages even when we don't know the names of those languages. That's called universal pattern. So for example, all languages will have sentences. This is part of universal principle and therefore part of universal grammar. In fact, there are parameters which are also part of universal grammar. So universal grammar has two parts. One is principle, the other is principles, other is parameters. So I give you an example of all languages will have sentences. All sentences must have a subject. These are part of universal principles. And the universal parameters are those along which languages differ from one another. So English is a verb medial language and Marathi or Hindi or Assamese are verb final languages. These are parametric features of language. Uh, Riddhi Wagle. I'm currently in the final year of my UG since not much is taught about linguistics at UG level here in MP. Could you please tell what strategy could be used for GATE 2021? Linguistics paper, I don't know about that. But if you look at the MA curriculum of any university, MA curriculum will help you prepare for GATE 2021. And you are right, Riddhi, that there isn't a lot of focus in the study of language at UG level in our system. So please look at MA curriculum of different universities. You will find a lot of things common among them, and you will get a lot for your preparation. Revati Gautam, the role of vowels in which some click languages. I'm not aware of that, Revati. However, I can talk about role of vowels in general. We cannot have a word without a vowel sound in language. Vowel sounds are that important. Vijay Amle, who are major figures in applied linguistics? I don't have a list, Vijay, with the major people. There are a lot of people who study different aspects of applied linguistics. It will be unfair to name few and not others. Anything else that you want to know? No? I am waiting. I will be around here for you. Please think about your questions and let me know. I am going back to your questions and reading them one after the other. There is no procedure behind giving our languages gaining standard status. It's just that people start treating one variety more standard than the other, and if at all there is any method underlying that, it's language of publication, language of newspapers, magazines, offices, languages used in formal domains. So the languages that are used in formal domains can be taken as standard language, and languages spoken by people are considered not so standard. What's a retroflex sound? Retroflex sound is a sound which is produced when tongue curls back and goes all the way up to alveolar ridge. For example, when we speak sounds like da, ta, da, say these sounds and you will see how your tongue rolls back and goes to the alveolar ridge. Sounds produced through that process are called retroflex sounds. Is it possible to sound like a native speaker of English in my mother tongue? My mother tongue is Odia, because I have practiced and I am not quite close, I can say. Priyanka, no, there is no way to sound like a native speaker. And if you don't sound like a native speaker while you speak English, you don't have to feel bad at all. You must sound the way you sound. Think about the following. Can English speakers sound like Odia speaker? When they speak, they learn to speak Odia? No, they can't. So the point is, nobody sounds like native speakers. I was talking about critical period hypothesis. Critical period is also relevant for maturation of our vocal tract. So once the vocal tract gets matured after the age of 14 or 15, and before that, the kinds of things that we have trained our vocal tract for, the sounds from languages that we speak, our vocal tract gets conditioned to that, and we won't sound like a British speaker of English or American speakers of English, no matter how hard you try. Therefore, my suggestion is not to try to sound like anybody, not to try to imitate anybody. You should speak with clarity, you should speak accurately, and you should sound like yourself. That's good enough English. And you don't have to feel bad about not sounding like anybody else. Be confident about yourself, speak the way you do. Important thing is to convey your point. Important thing is to convince others, not to sound like anybody. Hope that makes sense to you. That's a very important question in applied linguistics. That's a very important point that everybody needs to know. All of us need to keep these things in mind, that we don't need to sound like anybody. You are a native speaker of Odia. If somebody is a native speaker of Bengali, somebody is a native speaker of Marathi, they are going to have impact of those languages when they speak English. So there's nothing to feel bad about that. Okay. Moving ahead, Vijay Amle, theoretical linguistics and applied linguistics. Please tell us the difference in this. Theoretical linguistics is about the tools that we design to study language, and applied linguistics is the domain in which we apply those tools of language analysis to look at real life problems. That's the difference between the two. Riddhi, about script. Of course, it is possible to revive a script. Only condition is people should be in a position to use the script that you prescribe. So, uh, will people go back to? You're talking about Marathi. What's the name of that script again? Marathi used Modi script 700 years ago. Will people go back to that script, or will people continue using what they have been using? It's a tough question to answer, but of course it is possible to go back to older scripts. Uh, Drumi, um, I don't know which two, three questions you're talking about. If you put your questions here, I can answer that right away, or you can send it to us in question forum. Priyanka, we will look at that part. Uh, we will look at that part. I'm not sure about the portal thing. There was small issue with the portal, but now it has been restored. So should not have a problem. But if you have questions that you want me to answer right now, I can tell you right away. Of course, Revati, you are right. Saurashtra uses Tamil script. You see, as far as a script is concerned, any language can be written with any script. It's a matter of convenience of the community. Uh, and this dichotomy works for everything else. For example, look, uh, uh, we use Devanagari script for Hindi. That was not the script for Hindi. That was the script for Sanskrit. Devanagari script is used for multiple languages. Uh, Similarly, so there are a lot of languages which would use the script of others. For example, Kashmiri uses three different scripts: Devanagari, Perso-Arabic, and their own script. So the important point about a script is one can use any script for any language. The only thing is you have to look at language. Uh, Language is a very tricky thing. People become emotional about language. In our domain of study in linguistics, we look at language as an object of inquiry and not as an emotional issue. Then it becomes easier to understand. Anything else? There are several people online that we can see. Shoot your questions if you have more. For the people who are watching this online, is there any question that I may not have responded to, may not have answered, or I might have overlooked? If you feel your question is not answered, please speak up. I'll be happy to answer that. If I have skipped anything, that was totally unintentional. Priyanka Naik, you're talking about theory about origins of language. There are several discussions about that, but for the purpose of a study, it is not relevant. Okay, I will tell you why. You see, when language actually originated, and if it did at very ancient time, it has absolutely no similarity with what and how we speak now. So, if it fascinates somebody, people can. You have to stop.
2-3 minutes.
Okay. So if we have to, if it excites you to look at the history and history of the origin of language, it is fine. Otherwise, it's more for applied linguistics and linguistics study of language. It is more important to look at language the way it is spoken today. Endangered languages in India. There is a lot of endangered languages in India, and what is being done. I don't know much about endangered languages, Revati. The most important part that has to be done is to be done by community, not by us. People have to speak. That's the only thing that can save language. Examples of lexical features of language that are parts of a speech. Lexical features, Pratima, simply means words like nouns and adjectives and pronouns. And functional things are like tense, aspects, and mood and imperative features and others. So we are, if you have more questions, feel free to post them in the, I was very happy to interact with you. I see a lot of questions from Pratima and Revati and Priyanka and a lot of other people. Vijay, a lot of people have put their questions. Thank you for asking all of them. And we have a Tanuja, dialect, different standard language. I have just spoken about that, Tanuja. Dialect is different from standard language. See, I'll tell you again. I don't want to brush this aside. The notion of standard language is artificial, and the language that people speak is real. And there is nothing called dialect. Everything is language, and one needs to develop peaceful understanding about that. One needs to read it carefully. The dialect usually is considered, something is considered dialect when it's a variety of language or it's spoken by a smaller number of people, when it doesn't have printed materials in that language. But these are trivial things to examine that. Everything that is spoken by people is language. So as I was saying, it was very nice speaking with you. We have to close the session now. I encourage all of you to communicate to us through the portal, and we will be very happy to answer your questions in the portal. I personally look at the portal many times, and there are a lot of people who are watching those things. So feel free to ask in the long distance mode. I promise you I'll try to make it as interactive as possible. Thank you once again, and see you soon again for a new. We will meet again live, and we will do live sessions time to time. It was really good interacting with you. We'll continue this discussion further. Thank you so much.